Good morning, and thank you once again for your time. So today we're going to do a very brief introduction to those creatures who tweaked our DNA approximately 400,000 years ago, and they may very well be interdimensional creatures as well as far as we can gather, reptilians, which is something of a culture shock. I'll never forget about 20 years ago when I came across all that. I couldn't believe that as a mammal, and also as part of a race that was already theoretically evolving on its own course, that a reptilian from another dimension, let alone another planet or galaxy, would have the technology and the interest to interfere with that evolution. But it obviously suited them, and they've made it very clear that they do consider that they were here first, and that they consider us somewhat inferior, which we are in terms of technology, and that they have the right to do as they wish. And there's a lot of archaeological evidence supporting this, as well as lots of other very interesting factors, including, for example, elongated skulls that have absolutely no human DNA whatsoever, and then elongated skulls that have a mix of human and someone else's DNA, but it's definitely not human. And we have the cuneiform tablets as translated not only by Zachariah Sitchin, though he is probably the best on this subject, and that's going to be the object of another podcast later on. I haven't put him in the description, but because it merits a whole episode to himself. Absolutely fascinating, brilliant work, absolutely researched, and everything is backed up. So, approximately 400,000 years ago, our DNA was tweaked, and this is validated by Zachariah Sitchin, as well as, if you look at the work of Praveen Mohan, he did brilliant work and still does on the Hindu temples, and we have depictions of very large creatures with elongated skulls, making it very clear that they can genetically modify and mix various races of animals that you wouldn't normally think were compatible. And this is very graphic as well. There's another indication of this intervention at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and you will find that in the description. And there is a totem in Göbekli Tepe which was discovered in 1985 by the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who sadly has left us, as has Zachariah Sitchin. And there's this totem in the middle of this site, which is a fascinating site, and I'll go into that in some detail as well later on. There's a totem with all sorts of various creatures that we don't know what they are. They do depict creatures elsewhere on the site that we recognize, but there's also a whole set of creatures we don't. Anyway, going down this totem pole, at the very bottom, there is what we consider to be a baby coming out of a human vagina, and that would appear to be some indication of genetic intervention and the DNA that we may have that is actually in our system. Now, also at Göbekli Tepe, it's quite funny, there is a statue in the museum in a corner on its own of a person that looks so like Captain Picard it isn't funny, from Star Trek. I'm not joking. He has the jumper just like out of Star Trek. He's got the Star Trek trousers, the little booties. He does have an insignia on his jumper, which is a V-necked jumper. He does not have a mobile phone or a communicator, and he does not have a phaser. And facially, honestly, you would think it was Captain Picard. Anyway, the technology has been proved that it does exist in many, many ways and forms, including these huge monolithic structures, these huge stones, the accuracy with which they are placed, their alignment to stellar constellations, as well as solar movements, as well as lunar movements, the mathematics, the geometry is absolutely unbelievable. And often the question was posed, why polygonal geometry with these huge blocks? Why isn't it just squared when we know they can do just squares and right angles? And it was later discovered that the polygonal geometry is actually earthquake proof. So that's how well they knew the terrain and how far ahead they were thinking. Now, with all these civilizations on all the continents, it's also quite fascinating to find that there are many, many shared symbols between these civilizations as well. And one of them is the man bag. Major characters, whether they're gods or semi-gods because they were mixed with humans, they carry a little bag. And we don't know what's in the bag. We suspect that it was a device that would control the machines that did the cutting, the lifting, the placing, and generally was just like us, where we can't actually leave the house without our iPhone or smartphone, I beg your pardon. So the other symbols are also on the petroglyphs all over the world. There are at least 32 that are shared on each continent, which is quite amazing. Then we have, with these very large structures, other symbols like the spread eagle in one form or another, Egyptian, Babylonian, Sumerian. They also have it in the South American Aztec, well, it's what passes for Aztec, but it's not Aztec. But in South America, they also have various forms of the spread eagle. The serpent is absolutely everywhere, or the dragon, depending on how you want to depict it. And that's also very present. In Australia, they have Egyptian hieroglyphics. They also have a very large pyramid in Indonesia that is estimated to be a minimum of 20,000, if not 27,000 years old. And when you look at Earth's history, there have been 6 major near extinction experiences which have been attributed to ice ages, meteorites, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, all sorts of major upheavals, whereby humanity has come very near to extinction. Now, it's very interesting we've managed to survive. We're now fighting a battle against people who want to poison us with vaccines, poison us with lab-grown meat, poison us with geoengineering the air, poison us with fluoride in the water, create food supplies, or in the state of permanent war as well. Now, we've survived, and I'm sure we will prevail through this very sad chapter in our history. We do have to keep communicating. And whilst social media is absolutely brilliant in that it gives voice to challenge the mainstream narrative, it's lots of separate voices. We are all going to have to unite at one stage. Anyway, that's a little parenthesis. But I agree with Katie Hopkins when she says that we do have to have a shared experience as well. Anyway, we've survived 6 near extinction experiences, and we keep finding layers and layers of civilizations. And The dating in some cases can be quite accurate, especially in Göbekli Tepe, where Pillar 43 does indicate stellar movements as well as solar movements, which tell us very clearly what dates they're referring to and which precession we are in. And the same with the Veda, it gives us these precessions which are very accurate. And it's amazing how mainstream archaeology can get all the dates wrong with these temples that are far older than the dates that they're giving them. And these temples are absolutely brilliant in terms of architecture and size and detail, and just like the constructions in South America, Central America, even in some cases North America. And it's very difficult to find them in North America because there's a law that says you can't go digging up mounds on the grounds that you're desecrating sacred burial grounds. No proof that they are actually burial grounds. However, with Stonehenge and the Neolithic structures all over Europe and in Siberia, the Urals, well, we're looking at enormous blocks, right? And you look at the accuracy with which they are aligned. They also have them in Japan. They also have something very similar to the North Sea anomaly underwater in Japan as well. And it's no surprise at all that there is a sunken city off Cuba and another one off the Azores. The thing is, how many layers of civilization are we dealing with? And the second question is the timeline. So I think timelines go back far, far further. I also think that there are civilizations that may well have had an atomic and thermonuclear conflict and have wiped out all traces of their existence and perhaps even generated a near extinction experience, which has been completely occulted from the record because they destroyed all the records. Literally nothing, no skeletons, nothing. Now it's very interesting because in the Veda, they cite the use of atomic weapons, and they cite the city that sank, and in 1985 a British archaeologist who just literally got his diploma went out to this city, found it underwater. The fishermen said, well, this is where we get our nets caught all the time. He then went to certain ruins that were on land, and with Geiger counters and all the rest of it, they found skeletons that had 500 times more radiation than the norm. So we know definitely, and it was the right isotopes that concur with atomic bombs. So there was a limited atomic conflict in that part of the world, just as the Veda said. So we have to take the Veda far more seriously, because they also give instructions on how to construct flying vehicles. They may not use a very scientific language, but the diagrams are there, and the instructions are there, and the basic principles are there. And given the technology Tesla has legged us and left us, it's definitely something that needs looking at again, as well as re-examining the timelines. And it's also very interesting to note in the Veda that they speak of a time when these large prosperous cities dealt with humans who preferred to live in the wild, in the jungle, and the equivalent of the plain, but they still commerced with them, and they even married. So it's like there were several branches of humanity going in different directions, but they were also interacting. And it's very interesting that Neanderthal keeps getting upgraded as we keep understanding more and more about him. He was a very social creature. He did bury his dead. He did have the use of needles. So they did make clothes, and they did therefore have surgery if you have needles. And we think he also probably was quite artistic as well, given the cave paintings, which, by the way, do show humans coexisting with dinosaurs. And we also have proof that dinosaurs and humans coexisted with bones and tools and all the rest of it. So once again, separating dinosaurs from human is wrong. There was overlap at one stage in our history. And all of history has to be rewritten. We are being told an utter fairy tale. Now some people might say, well, interdimensional creatures who are reptilian, that's a fairy tale. They didn't have the technology, and I'm sorry, but in our brain we actually have a reptilian part of our brain, which goes from the spinal cord up into the center of the brain, and that part is known as the reptilian cortex, or something very similar, and it does control not only the automatic body functions such as breathing and sleeping and all the basic automatisms, but also when we're in very sticky situations, it controls whether it's a fight, a flight, or a freeze, and that is part of the reptilian brain cortex. Now, as I said in my previous podcast, there's only the octopus who hasn't got any relations on Earth. Most of the animals and most of the living creatures share quite a lot of DNA, believe it or not. So the animals that we are dealing with may well have also been genetically modified. Once again, Praveen Mahan shows wonderful sculptures of double-tusked elephants in these temples, which are meant to have been extinct at such and such a stage, and only 100 miles down the road there are skeletons of double-tusked elephants. Therefore, once again, there was overlap with humans living with dinosaurs, and there's obviously someone who has been playing with not only human DNA, but animal DNA as well. And so we have to also revise our consciousness and our understanding. Now, why would a highly intelligent civilization want to terraform Earth and then genetically modify the inhabitants? Well, obviously, they have an interest somewhere, not just natural resources, but perhaps the labor force for those natural resources to help them exploit it. Also, perhaps as laboratory rats, just taking notes so that for future use, if their race is in trouble, we can use some DNA, dash of that, sprinkling of this, and a little soupçon of whatever. Bit like cooking, a bit So yes, there could be a DNA bank somewhere, and they need to replenish stocks. I don't know. What I do know is that everything I've been taught is upside down and back to front, and therefore it's the beginning of a very, very fascinating adventure, and much knowledge has been suppressed. Too much. It's in everyone's interest for us to be fully conscious and to be educated and to be able to use that consciousness and that education for the betterment of ourselves and our fellows. It's as simple as that. It really is. Now, in the description, there's a lovely, lovely video of a mummy. It's not a mummy, actually. It's high-tech preservation that was discovered in Russia in 1969 in a very nice granite sarcophagus in a coal seam that's known to be one of the oldest coal seams in Russia. So this is 1969, the Soviet regime, and they discovered this sarcophagus, they were told not to open it, which obviously the miners did when everyone's back was turned before all the authorities arrived to take everything away. And there was this beautiful young lady who had white skin, whiter than someone suffering from albinism, and blonde hair, blue eyes, which were open and beautifully preserved, absolutely in stasis, absolutely beautiful. And she was wearing a semi-translucent dress, the material of which we don't know. And they didn't touch it, they didn't touch her. She also had a black box in her sarcophagus, and eyewitnesses, in retrospect now, say that it could have been something similar to a smartphone. And she was surrounded by a pink liquid. And when they'd taken the sarcophagus out of the mine to the surface, having put the lid back on, the authorities arrived with a helicopter to take it away, but it was too heavy for the helicopter, so they thought they would drain the pink liquid off. And as they did so, the body just decomposed in front of them. It was quite horrific. It was like something out of mythology. Anyway, prior to taking the sarcophagus from the mine to the surface, and they were all having a peek, one young miner, poor fellow, decided to stick his finger in the pink liquid and taste it, of all things. And sadly he died a few weeks later, which is very sad and unnecessary, but very unscientific on his part. Anyway, we never had any news of the black box, the princess as she was nicknamed because she was so pretty, and or the pink liquid, which is very fascinating. But eyewitness reports of people who were there and who were alive to be filmed. It's a lovely documentary. Now there's also in Russia a fantastic megalithic city which is beautifully aligned, stellar, solar. It's a recent discovery. Vladimir Putin did visit it a few years ago, with fantastic irrigation, fantastic plumbing, beautiful construction techniques. Way, I mean, high-tech city, right? A proper high-tech city. And it's in the middle of the Siberian plain. And they also had the tools, they had all sorts of lovely artifacts. This was not a primitive society, in fact. Oh, they also had the swastika. And it was very, very similar to the Indus Valley civilizations. And I'll put a link there as well. So we are looking at a global civilization, or civilizations. And people were sharing symbols, they were sharing technology. Where did they get the energy to travel those distances? Where did they get the energy to cut these enormous stones, transport them, place them with such accuracy? It's unbelievable. And then there's these wonderful irrigational systems. There's a whole body of knowledge out there. So the description is quite long and quite concentrated. However, if this does interest you, that'll keep you going for a few days before my next podcast. Anyway, I sincerely hope you enjoyed this. Please do let me know if you have any questions, and please do let me know if the subject is of interest and what aspects would you like more of. Thank you very much indeed. Have a wonderful day. I'm going off to do all sorts of really boring things now.